The darkness you run from is the very thing that holds your liberation. In your shadow lies not your enemy, but the forgotten fragments of your wholeness. How long have you fled from yourself? How many years spent averting your gaze from what lurks beneath your carefully constructed persona? When I first gazed into the abyss of my own unconscious, I too felt that primal terror. The shadow is not merely our darker impulses, it is the warehouse of all we have disowned. Everything deemed unacceptable, shameful, primitive. Everything society instructed you to hide. Everything your parents frowned upon. Everything that didn't fit the image you crafted for the world. The modern world offers 1,000 distractions from this inner work. Technology has given us unparalleled capacity to numb ourselves, to scroll away the whispers of the unconscious. But no matter how sophisticated our evasions become, the shadow remains. It speaks through your dreams, it erupts in your relationships, it manifests in the very things that inexplicably trigger you in others. What you resist not only persists, it grows in power. The energy required to keep these disowned parts submerged is immense. It exhausts you, though you may not recognize the source of this fatigue. Your vitality bleeds into the unconscious, feeding the very demons you seek to starve. Consider this. The qualities in others that provoke your strongest reactions, are they not reflections of what you've rejected in yourself? The arrogance you despise, the weakness you condemn, the selfishness you judge? Each points with unerring accuracy to your own unlived life, to the aspects of yourself you've deemed unworthy of expression. This is projection, the unconscious mechanism by which we cast our shadow onto the world. It is far easier to battle these qualities externally than to face them within, but this battle can never be won, for how can you triumph over what is, in essence, yourself? The shadow is not evil. This is perhaps the most profound misunderstanding of our time. The shadow simply is. It contains not only your destructive impulses, but your unrealized creative potential, your unacknowledged talents, your buried gifts. As I have often noted, in the shadow is gold. What magnificent possibilities lie dormant within your disowned self? Modern life increasingly pulls us toward collective conformity, while paradoxically preaching individualism. We perform versions of ourselves on social media, carefully curating our image while the shadow grows heavier, denser, more insistent in its demands for integration. This contradiction creates unprecedented psychological pressure. The first step toward wholeness is radical honesty. Can you acknowledge the jealousy that burns within you when others succeed? Can you recognize the rage that simmers beneath your polite exterior? Can you admit the grandiose fantasies, the petty resentments, the secret beliefs that contradict your public values? This is not self-flagellation. It is not confession. It is simply seeing what is, without judgment, without shame, without the need to immediately transform it. Just seeing, just knowing, just bringing consciousness to what has lived too long in darkness. The unconscious is not merely a psychological concept, it is a living reality, as tangible as the ground beneath your feet. It speaks its own symbolic language. It operates by its own logic. It cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or silenced. It can only be met, listened to, integrated. Look to your dreams. They are not random neural firings, meaningless brain activity during sleep. They are messages from the deeper self, communications from the unconscious. They reveal what your waking mind refuses to see. They offer symbolic representations of your inner conflicts, your unfulfilled longings, your untapped potential. When was the last time you truly listened to a dream? Not dismissed it upon waking, not forgotten it in the rush toward productivity, but actually listened. The unconscious speaks most clearly when we are asleep, precisely because our conscious defenses are lowered. It seizes this opportunity to communicate what we need most to hear. The collective unconscious extends beyond your personal history. It contains the archetypal patterns inherited from our ancestors, the primordial images and instincts that have shaped human experience across millennia. You are not merely an individual. You are a nexus point for forces that have been evolving since the dawn of consciousness. The hero, the mother, the wise old man, the trickster, these are not mere literary constructs. They are living energies within your psyche. They influence your choices, your attractions, your fears. When you feel possessed by rage, by lust, by inspiration, you are experiencing the activation of these archetypal energies. Shadow work is not a linear process with a clear endpoint. It is a spiral journey that continues throughout life. As you integrate one aspect of your shadow, another layer reveals itself. This is not failure, it is growth. The unconscious is vast, perhaps infinite. You do not complete this work, you simply commit to it. The modern spiritual bypass tempts many. The notion that we can transcend our darkness through positive thinking, through affirmations, through focusing exclusively on light. This is dangerous self-deception. True spirituality embraces the full spectrum of human experience. It does not flinch from darkness, but brings consciousness to it. What happens when the shadow is ignored, denied, repressed? It doesn't disappear. It finds expression through physical symptoms, through compulsive behaviors, through projection onto others, through eruptions of out-of-character actions that later leave you baffled. How could I have done that, you ask? It was your shadow demanding recognition. Consider the individuals who present themselves as paragons of virtue, who proclaim their moral superiority most loudly. Are they not often the ones eventually revealed to have the most profoundly split psyches, the preacher condemning sin while secretly indulging, the moral crusader hiding their own violations? This is not hypocrisy. It is the inevitable consequence of shadow denial. Every virtue, when taken to its extreme, becomes a vice. The caring person becomes self-sacrificing to the point of martyrdom. The disciplined individual becomes rigid and controlling. The compassionate soul becomes an enabler. This is the shadow of virtue, the way our strengths, when unconscious, become our weaknesses. Ancient societies understood the necessity of shadow confrontation, initiation rites, vision quests, shamanic dismemberment. These practices force the individual to face their fears, their mortality, their darkness. Modern society has abandoned these rituals, leaving us psychologically adrift, without guidance for this essential inner work. The contemporary worship of comfort keeps us trapped in unconsciousness. Growth requires discomfort. Integration demands that we tolerate the anxiety of facing what we've denied. There is no painless path to wholeness, but the pain of growth is far less severe than the chronic suffering of a divided self. Look at the collective shadow erupting globally, the polarization, the tribalism, the demonization of the other. When millions project their shadow onto opposing political groups, onto other nations, onto different races or religions, we create the conditions for collective violence. Individual shadow work is thus not merely personal growth. It is a contribution to global healing. The most dangerous people are not those aware of their capacity for destruction. They are those who believe themselves incapable of it. History's greatest atrocities were not committed by self-identified monsters, but by ordinary people convinced of their righteousness. People who had so thoroughly disowned their shadow that they could project absolute evil onto others and absolute good onto themselves. In dreams begin responsibilities. When you become conscious of your shadow, you can no longer plead ignorance when it acts through you. This is the burden of consciousness, the requirement to take responsibility for all that you are, not just the parts you wish to claim. But in this responsibility lies freedom, the freedom to choose, to integrate, to transform. Your shadow contains precisely the energies you need for your evolution. The aggression you've denied holds your power to set boundaries, to protect what matters, to say no to exploitation. The sexuality you've repressed contains your capacity for deep intimacy, for primal connection, for creative force. The selfishness you judge harbors your ability to prioritize your authentic needs. Integration does not mean indulgence. It does not mean acting out every impulse from the unconscious. It means bringing these energies into relationship with consciousness, with values, with choice. The integrated person doesn't suppress anger. They channel it toward justice. They don't deny ambition. They align it with purpose. The psyche naturally moves toward wholeness. This is its teleological function, its inherent direction. But consciousness must participate willingly in this process. You must choose integration. You must choose to see what is easier to ignore. You must choose the temporary discomfort of truth over the familiar comfort of illusion. Consider your relationships. Are they not mirrors reflecting your unconscious material back to you? The conflicts that arise repeatedly, the patterns that follow you from relationship to relationship, these are not accidents or mere compatibility issues. They are sacred opportunities to recognize your projections, to reclaim your disowned parts. Our culture's emphasis on external achievement leaves little space for inner exploration. We measure success in possessions, in status, in followers, not in psychological integration, not in self-knowledge, not in the capacity to hold paradox and complexity. But what profit is there in gaining the world while remaining a stranger to yourself? The individuation process, the journey toward becoming your full, unique self, requires darkness. Just as a seed must be buried in soil before it can grow toward light, your potential must encounter your shadow before it can fully emerge. There is no shortcut, no technology, no technique that can circumvent this fundamental truth. The unconscious speaks in symbols. A tree is never just a tree in a dream. Water is never just water. These images connect to the primordial language of humanity, to the archetypal realm where personal meaning intersects with collective significance. Learning to interpret these symbols is learning the native tongue of your deeper self. Your symptoms, your anxieties, your compulsions, your depressions are not merely inconveniences to be eliminated. They are communications. They are the psyche's way of signaling that something is out of balance, that integration is needed. The medical model pathologizes these signals. Depth psychology honors them as messengers. The tension between opposites generates energy. Light and shadow, masculine and feminine, creation and destruction. When you try to live exclusively on one side of any polarity, you deplete your vitality. The integrated life embraces paradox, contains contradiction, unites opposites within the larger whole of the self. Modern neuroscience confirms what I discovered through my inner explorations. The mind is not unitary, but multiple. Different neural networks activate different aspects of personality, different memory systems, different emotional states. What we experience as inner conflict reflects actual physiological processes. Integration is not merely psychological, it is neurological. The persona, the social mask we wear, is necessary for functional living in society. But when we mistake this mask for our identity, we lose connection with our authenticity. The stronger the persona, the denser the shadow. Those most invested in their public image often have the most to hide from themselves. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face what terrifies you, especially when what terrifies you is yourself. The descent into the unconscious requires a hero's journey. You must leave the familiar world of conscious identity, face trials in the underworld of the psyche, and return transformed, bearing the gift of greater wholeness. The alchemists spoke of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, rigid structures of identity must dissolve. Old certainties must liquefy. Then, a new integration can coagulate. A more inclusive structure can form. This cycle repeats throughout life as we continue to evolve, to incorporate more of our full humanity into conscious living. What you judge most harshly in yourself is precisely where healing is most needed. Not healing as elimination, as excision of the offending part, but healing as acceptance, as integration, as transmutation of raw energy into conscious power. Your so-called flaws contain your unrealized gifts. The shadow is not static. It changes throughout life as different aspects of self move between conscious and unconscious. What was once in shadow may become integrated, while previously conscious qualities may be repressed as life circumstances change. Shadow work is therefore not a one-time task, but an ongoing relationship with the unconscious. Modern psychology often focuses on symptom reduction, on returning the individual to normal functioning. But what if your symptoms are not the problem? What if they are pointing toward the real problem, a life too small for your soul, a conscious identity insufficient for your full being? What if breakdown is the prerequisite for breakthrough? The path of individuation is not self-indulgence. It is not narcissistic navel-gazing. It is the most profound contribution you can make to collective healing. For how can humanity evolve beyond its destructive patterns if individuals refuse to face their own capacity for destruction? How can we create a more conscious society without becoming more conscious ourselves? The shadow is not personal only. It extends to family, to culture, to nation, to species. You inherit shadow material from your parents, who inherited it from theirs. You absorb disowned collective content from your cultural context. Working with your individual shadow therefore connects you to the healing of these larger systems. Notice what you are drawn to judge in others. Notice what behaviors instantly trigger your contempt, your disgust, your moral outrage. In these reactions lies the map to your shadow, for we are most triggered by what we have most thoroughly repressed in ourselves. The qualities that evoke our strongest judgments are often those we've most strongly disowned. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow. This is impossible. The goal is to bring it into relationship with consciousness, to create dialogue where there was division, to establish communication where there was dissociation, to build a bridge between the world of light and the world of darkness within you. The integrated person is not a saint. They are deeply, authentically human. They have not transcended their humanity, but embraced it fully. They can access their aggression and their tenderness, their rationality and their intuition, their strength and their vulnerability. They contain multitudes, and they contain them consciously. Modern life fragments our attention. We live in a perpetual state of partial presence, constantly pulled between tasks, between screens, between identities. This fragmentation makes shadow work both more difficult and more essential. For how can you face what you're running from when you never stop running? The unconscious communicates through synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that defy rational explanation. When the inner and outer worlds align in unexpected ways, the unconscious is often speaking. Pay attention to these moments. They are windows into the larger patterns shaping your life beyond conscious awareness. In dreams, in art, in moments of deep honesty, the shadow reveals itself. These glimpses may disturb your conscious identity, may threaten your carefully constructed sense of who you are, but they also offer liberation from the exhausting effort of maintaining that construction. There is profound relief in finally acknowledging what you have always at some level known. Projection will continue until integration occurs. You will see your disowned qualities in others, react with disproportionate emotion to these qualities, and remain blind to the source of these reactions, until you bring consciousness to the process. Once seen, projections begin to dissolve. Once named, the shadow begins to transform. The spiritual traditions that endure do not offer escape from shadow. They provide frameworks for its integration. The Buddhist confrontation with desire and aversion, the Christian concept of wrestling with sin, the Hindu dance of creation and destruction. These are not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated technologies for shadow work. The shadow is often experienced first as emptiness, as the void that feels intolerable, that must be filled with distraction, with addiction, with noise. But when finally faced, this emptiness reveals itself as fullness, as the unformed potential from which new life emerges. What you fear as nothingness is actually the source of everything. Integration is not a destination, but a dynamic balance, a dance between consciousness and the unconscious that continues throughout life. Some days you will feel more whole, more unified, more at peace with your complexity. Other days, the inner divide will reassert itself. This rhythm is natural, not a sign of failure. The invitation is not to perfect yourself, but to complete yourself. Not to transcend your humanity, but to embody it fully. Not to eliminate darkness, but to bring light to it. Not to silence the unconscious, but to enter into dialogue with it. Not to overcome the shadow, but to embrace it as the missing piece of your wholeness. For in that embrace, in that courageous act of reclaiming all that you are, lies the treasure that has always been yours, the gold hidden in darkness, waiting to be discovered by one brave enough to make the descent. This is your journey. This is your work. This is your gift to yourself and to the world. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is the disowned part of yourself that has been waiting, patient, powerful, pregnant with possibility, for you to turn toward it, to acknowledge it, to integrate it into the fullness of who you truly are. Embrace your shadow, for only then can you become whole.